Willkommen in einem einen Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 11 of my game design series of videos. In this video I'll be providing a brief overview of Napoleonic small army or small battle scale rules. These videos are broken up based on the size of the total army that a player could be expected to command in a game and come home after a game of gaming. Typically 50 elements per side over 12 game turns is a reasonable maximum a single player can handle for a 4 to 6 hour game. There are some exceptions, but this is a good ground rule. Games which involve multiple players per side can command larger forces, but these games require a large playing area which can be set up for several months, allowing for the lads to drop by each Thursday for beer and pizza to play a single game turn. That way a 12 game turn game can be completed in 12 weeks. What I'm really talking about in this video are club games which need to be completed in a day, with no more than 6 hours of gaming and 1 hour to set up, pack up at each end. Rules which use an infantry scale of 200 to 250 men per figure typically only allow for each player to command multiple corps, typically about 3. With 50 bases or 200 figures, a player the size of the player's force mix could represent 24,000 to 50,000 men. One set of rules covered here is rather unusual, DBN. DBM has an element scale which implies it could deal with a very large battle, but as it's optimally designed for 12 elements per side, armies of 24,000 per side is more typical, and armies of 48,000 just possible for a single player to command. This scale is primarily focused on the gamers and those interested in the operational nature of a game. Individual battalions or regiments are invisible, although it's possible to have brigades and divisions. I overlooked Napoleon battles in my original video, and I'm uncertain why I did so. Napoleon battles is probably the first set of rules which allow players to reproduce an actual historical battle, rather than a single corps engagement, and does represent a singularity of sorts. Published by Avalon Hill back in the late 1980s, it introduced a new element basing standard in the US. Although I must admit, Corps Commander predates these rules by a year and it uses a similar basing system. Regardless, these rules were very popular and propagated the 2x2 element standard for infantry, although most players did not adopt this standard for cavalry. Perhaps not as popular outside the US, these rules are constantly referenced, and I must admit they are most certainly the first at this scale which gain real traction and popularity. I personally feel any player should consider getting a copy of these rules, as they really represent a rather significant event, and I have no doubt that players would find it useful. As for a set of rules commonly being played today, perhaps not, as the state of the art has moved on. Italian was a real mystery to me. I do vaguely remember playing a few games back in the early 1990s, but I don't remember much else. They seem to be club rules, which were probably created by several players in a single club. I accidentally found an old copy in my files. Regardless, the thing which interests me was that these rules were apparently based on DBA, which I found rather interesting. I've been looking at DBN, which is also based on DBA, and I've always assumed they were the only real DBA derivative that was out there, but I was clearly wrong. The rules have some editing issues, and there are handwritten errata in the copy, which is available on the Italian IO group site. So I OCR'd it and created a corrected copy, as well as cleaning up some of the editing issues. The rules allow a player to field a force of up to 40,000 men for a game, which could be expected to complete in a day. Apart from this, the game system is rather standard, and due to the lack of supporting material, represents more of a curious interest rather than a set of standard rules that players should consider. Sharko has two scales, a tactical scale and a grand tactical. All scales are grand tactical in this video, and the ground scale is based on the element width and scale. There are three basing systems. I provided the metric version of basing system A. The other systems all allow for smaller bases. I assume to allow for play on a smaller playing area. These rules are very short and seem simple enough. It has reasonable focus on orders, although very similar to Artie's spearhead rules. I personally don't like them very much, but combined with the reserve rules, I have to admit, almost against my will, that the order rules do work very well. Both players can start with equal armies and select part of the forces to remain in reserve. This is critical as once given orders, formations find it hard to change orders. Thus, the reserves act as the true attack forces. Of course, once a player has committed their reserves, the other player can possibly gain advantage by committing their reserves at a different sector of the battlefield. It's a clever way of resolving a major issue with Napoleonics, how to create a game which is interesting when both sides are equal in size. DBN was my main focus rules for 15mm for a while, and I did study them in great detail. They are based on DBA, which is not a major issue, but after careful analysis, they are very closely based on DBA. So optimally a game is played on a 2-foot square with 12 elements aside, like DBA. Anyone familiar with DBA can be familiar with these rules, and they give you a good, tight game in a very short time period. Each side commands forces of about 20,000 men, so you could refight Marengo using these rules if you wish. I like these rules as they are perfect for quick games, but anything larger consists of adding more pairs of players. Austerlitz would require 4 players on each side, allowing each army to consist of 80,000 men each. While I like these type of mass player games, they're less games and more social get-togethers. There is elements of DBMM in these rules, so I'd expect it's possible for a game consisting of 40 to 50 elements per side, which I'm guessing would take from about 4 to 6 hours to play. But I'm really uncertain about this, and the core rules aren't really designed for this in the first place. As with DBA, there is much. This is very much a element maneuver game, where when the way you maneuver your elements, it gives you victory or causes you to lose. The Age of Eagles are reasonably good introductory rules, clearly designed to allow players to refight entire battles up to about 40,000 men aside. They are designed for 15mm, and the game system seems simple and very playable. I'd probably recommend these rules for new players, as the rules themselves are one of the best learning documents I've ever seen. While I've not checked out the supporting material in great detail, I've been told there is a good range of this material available if you look. The basing uses the 4 figures per base, 2 up front and 2 to the rear system, common in the US, and I personally think it looks rather good. Age of Eagles is a variant of the enormously popular and influential ACW rules, Fire and Fury, which are also recently received a 2nd edition and branched out to the regimental scale. March Attack is eminently playable with multiple corps and is a hidden gem of Napoleonic army-level gaming. March Attack are presented as an 80-page A4 full-colour perfectly bound book. The rules are designed to allow players to fight large battles with battalion-sized units in a reasonable period of time. Command and control, orders and morale for large formations are combined with easy-to-learn tactical game mechanics so that battles of a corps or more per side can easily be fought by a few players during an evening. Each unit on the table represents a battalion of infantry, regiment of cavalry, or battalion of artillery. A ground scale of 1 inch to 60 yards, 1 turn representing 20 minutes, and a fast-paced strategic movement rules means that the battle plays out in a reasonable rate. Combat is dealt with in a manner which allows large numbers of units to be fielded, and the interaction between strategic movement and tactical movement allows for fast-paced games that keep a good level of detail. Several different training and morale level combinations with the historical strength of units introduces the concept of command value. This ties together all the tactical rules and ensures that troop quality, more than just luck or buckets of dust, plays an important part in every battle. CCC are another interesting set of freeware rules. They remind me a bit of Lost Battles, that's the ancient Lost Battles, as all the scales change based on what size of formation you wish to command, from division to Grand Army. Based on the game turn scale, I suspect the focus is on the lower scale rather than the larger, but I have not given these rules a solid gaming test, thus it's difficult for me to be certain. The sequence of play is based on events, which activities seemingly occurring simultaneously as well as being rather prescriptive. This really feels like a set of older simultaneous sequence of play rules, which were very common before the mid-1970s. The rules, although only being 43 pages in length, are very detailed and seemingly rather complex. The formatting is good, using a detailed case system, although it seems to lack enough cross-referencing. I lack sufficient information to make an informed comment on these rules, but they appear to be a true labour of love for gamers who wish a great deal of detail, mainly focused on the historical axis of gaming. Polemos Rules de Guerre is specifically designed to cover the North American wars of the latter half of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century, with the primary focus being infantry combat, which for the period is reasonable. The primary figure scale is 6mm using the standard 6cm wide bases. The command system is based on tempo points, which is an adaptation of command point system, although it contains some nuances when determining the values. This seems to be the key of the game and its main focus. The sequence of play starts with fire combat, followed by movement, and finally close combat. There is a major focus on simplification, with the combat system being simplified in terms of modifiers. The aspect which is often mentioned is the use of D10 rules and the lack of formation, such as line, column, square. I suspect house rules would be required to allow you to play Napoleonic conflicts with these rules. Napoleonic Kriegsführung is my attempt at creating a Napoleonic set of rules for 15mm. The rules were inspired by Empire 3rd edition. The objective of those rules is something that really appeals to me. The issue with Empire 3rd edition is I found it so hard to learn the rules, I never experienced the objective that the rules were trying to point me towards. Napoleonic Kriegsführung is my attempt to achieve that objective, but with a much simpler game system. Each player expends time and effort lining up their corps, and the first player to get all their ducks lined up can launch their attack and win the game, theoretically. If they attack too early, that means they haven't lined things up correctly, and they most likely will be repulsed very quickly. If they've timed it well, on the other hand, and everything lines up correctly, then they should be able to be very successful. The result is a lot of manoeuvring, punctuated by intense combat, which consists of repeating combat rounds until one side is forced back. Napoleon battles really kicked off this scale with the ability to refight actual historical battles, even if they were rather small battles. Marengo could easily be refought with Napoleonic battles, which is something that was new at the time. What really drove players to this scale was the desire to command a whole army. As a result, the main scale used was 15mm, at least initially, and there was a reduced focus on recreating formations and a greater focus on recreating an actual historical battle. Charcot continued this trend, and those rules became reasonably popular in the late 1990s. However, this popularity did not exist much out of the US. The same scale trend was really driven by US players, with UK players still focused on the smaller scales. The final evolution of this trend was Age of Eagles, which has a very strong focus on reproducing whole battles. I must admit the larger battles were all multi-day affairs, as once you moved beyond 48,000 men per side, there was no way you could complete a game in a day. You would also need a rather large playing area, although I notice the scenarios tend to encourage figure crowding quite a lot. Outside the US, I could not find players using any of these rules very much. However, this could be due to the circle of contacts I possess. Polymus rules are popular in Holland, but not rules which really comfortably fit into the scale. My general feeling is players today who want to reproduce a whole battle go for rules which provide a higher scale than these rules would typically provide. In the US, large playing areas can be set up in a garage and gamers can come over to play a multiple game day. So as a result, it's not so much of an issue. In Europe, this is less of an option and games need to be played at a club with a duration of 4 to 8 hours. Personally, I prefer Age of Eagles and do like these rules, but I also understand the limitation of those rules as well. You need a large playing area and several days to reproduce many full battles, unless it's a very small battle. Finally, let's talk about the figure scale. These rules do suit 15mm figures. I don't see many games on a standard size playing area using 20mm or larger figures using these rules. On the other hand, I do not see many examples of 6mm figures at this scale either, which may be a little bit unusual. And so we come to a conclusion of my episode 11 of my video on game system design, which in this case provides an overview of Napoleonic small army scale figure gaming rules. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.